Welcome! Today I've got another fascinating convict family story to share. One I stumbled upon quite unexpectedly in a cafe in the small town of Axedale near Bendigo. Now, if you're ever in the area, I highly recommend stopping by the Rise and Grind Cafe. The coffee is excellent and the food, and on the day I visited, the local gold mine was treating everyone to free coffees, so that was definitely a win. So while I was there, I picked up a copy of the Axedale local community paper. It was called Axedale Antics. And inside was a compelling story researched and written by Francis Ford, and it told of a man buried in the Axedale Cemetery who was not only a convict himself, but also the son of an English convict transported to Australia in 1825. Both father and son shared the same name, Jonathan Harris. So I have decided to call Jonathan Sr. Jonathan and Jonathan Jr. John. In this video, I'll be drawing on the research of Francis Ford and B. Collette from WikiTree, while also delving deeper into the Harris family's story myself to uncover even more about their fascinating history. Jonathan Harris, Sr., was born in Uckfield, Sussex, around the year 1800, and he worked as an agricultural labourer and ploughman in the area. And in 1821, he married Elizabeth Baker in the nearby village of Mayfield. The following year, their first child, a son, was born. His name was Jonathan Jr., and he is the central figure in today's video. 2 years later, in 1823, their daughter Mary was born, followed by the birth of Henry Harris in 1825. Whether it was due to poverty and the need to feed his family, or for reasons unknown, in February of 1825, Jonathan was charged with burglary at his master's house, Thomas Cobram. He was accused of stealing goods valued at £18, 19 shillings and 6 pence, quite a lot. He was tried in March at the Horsham Assizes and was sentenced to be hanged. Thankfully, his sentence was reprieved to transportation for life, and in March he was taken to the prison hulk York at Portsmouth. Elizabeth and the children were now facing the loss of their husband, father, and most likely their only source of support. The emotional and practical toll on families left behind by transportation must have been immense. Many wives and children chose to follow their convicted husbands to Australia in the hope of reuniting and rebuilding their lives, including Elizabeth, but more about that later. Jonathan remained on the hulk for 4 months before being put onto the transportation ship the Marquess of Hastings. The Marquess left port in August 1825 with 152 male convicts on board, and it arrived in Sydney on January the 3rd, 1826. A notice in the newspapers at the time explained that the Marquess did not land at the usual place in Sydney Cove, but in the government domain in Farm Cove. Originally established as a government farm in 1788, the site had evolved into a landscaped parkland surrounding the governor's residence. Located between Sydney Cove and Woolloomooloo Bay, the domain included the ridge above Farm Cove and extended to areas now occupied by the Royal Botanic Gardens and Government House. The men were taken to the Hyde Park Barracks, where the governor inspected them and was pleased to hold out to them the prospect of every proper encouragement on condition of their good behaviour, after which they were distributed throughout the country. Jonathan Harris was assigned to ex-convict Charles Thompson as a farm labourer. Thompson had been transported for 7 years for stealing 2 library books. Wow, that's harsh. According to the 1828 census, Jonathan was living with Charles, his family, and a large number of other convicts on what was then known as Clydesdale. At the time, the Clydesdale area referred to a rural estate located in what is now Marsden Park, within the city of Blacktown. Originally granted to businessman Walter Lang in 1813 as a 700-acre property called Lang's Farm. The estate was later sold to Thompson, who expanded it to 865 acres and developed it into quite a substantial farming operation, complete with a Georgian-style homestead, barns, stables and orchards. It was from here that Jonathan petitioned the colonial secretary to have his wife Elizabeth Baker and their 3 children join him in New South Wales. After years apart, Elizabeth and their 3 children, John Jr., who was now around 9 years old, Elizabeth Jr., who was 7, and Henry, who was 6, finally arrived in Sydney on the 11th of March 1831. Now, it's interesting because Elizabeth had had little Henry after Jonathan had already been transported. So Jonathan had never met Henry. So they arrived aboard the Cairns or the Cairns, Kains. Does anyone know how to say that? I'll say Cairns, a female convict transport ship. And the family initially settled in Windsor, as noted in a government labour exemption dated the 1st of June 1831, which records Jonathan living there with Elizabeth, who was described as free by the Cairns. By early 1832, they had moved to Parramatta, though a later note from January 1833 suggests they had relocated again to the Argyll region, likely near Goulburn or Michigan. Between Elizabeth's arrival and 1836, the couple welcomed 3 more children: Sophia, born in 1832, Thomas 1833, and George in 1835. All were baptised at St John's Church in Parramatta. Now, I forgot to mention that glorious bluestone fence over there. Isn't it fantastic? Now, Axedale is known for its bluestone and white clay, and there are quite a number of these rock fences, what would you call them? Bluestone rock fences in the Axedale area, and a number of bluestone churches and homes, and they really are a fantastic history, but also really beautiful. And I remember when we were younger, driving through the area, my mother would always say, "Oh, convicts built those fences, convicts built those fences." So I've just always grown up believing that convicts built those fences. I'm not 100% sure that they did or not. It might have just been the farmers, because Axedale is also a very Irish area. I think it was pioneered or settled by the Irish, so I don't think there's really that many names in this cemetery that were not Irish, which was interesting. So it could have just been an Irish thing, knowing that there's lots of rocks in Irish and lots of stone fences in Ireland, so they may have just brought that practice with them. Or, I like to think the convicts made them, so we'll just go with that. A year after young George was born, tragedy struck. On the 30th of March 1836, Elizabeth was killed in a cart accident while travelling from Bonbon to Campbelltown. An article in the Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser on Saturday, April the 2nd, described the accident. Under the headline, Dreadful Accident, on Wednesday last, as a cart containing a woman and infant child, driven by a lad, the son of the woman, was proceeding from Bong Bong to Campbelltown on the way to the market. The lad allowed the horse to swerve from the road and, coming on a ridge, capsized it. When, awful to relate, the woman fell under the cart and was crushed to death. The feelings of the lad, who was unable to raise the cart from off of his dying parent, can be better imagined than portrayed. Sometime after, the mail passing rendered all the assistance possible, but the hand of death had marked the unfortunate woman for his victim. All aid was vain. The child, strange to say, escaped uninjured. A coroner's inquest was convened at the time, and our informant left Campbelltown, the result of which we are not aware of. The trauma of that moment must have been unimaginable for the children, especially for young John, who not only witnessed the accident but was driving the cart that ultimately led to his mother's death. The horror of being unable to lift the cart from her dying body, as described in the newspaper report, would have left a lasting emotional scar for the surviving children. Losing their mother so suddenly and violently, while still so young, must have been deeply distressing, and it's hard to fathom how they coped in the years that followed. It's unclear how Jonathan Sr. managed in the years following Elizabeth's death. Though his older children, John Jr. and Elizabeth Jr., aged 14 and 12 respectively, may have helped care for the younger siblings, or I've no doubt that Elizabeth did anyway. His legal status during this period is also uncertain, as he may have been assigned to his wife under a labour exemption. The loss of his wife appears to have marked the beginning of a decline in Jonathan Sr.'s life. In July 1837, roughly a year after her passing, he was imprisoned in Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney on the charges of robbery. The case was heard in August, where he stood trial for allegedly stealing 3 bulls belonging to Edmund Lockyer of Lockyer Lee. Jonathan was ultimately acquitted. Some sources suggest that the acquittal may have been due to the absence of a key witness, a John Stroud, an employee of Lockyer, who failed to appear in court and was later found drowned in a creek near Juggiong. Sorry, I have no idea how to say that. Juggiong. Around this time, there was also unverified reports that Jonathan may have been operating a sly grog shop. So, oh dear. Maybe it's Juyong. Probably it sounds Juyong. That sounds maybe right. Okay, we'll just let that one go. So in February of 1838, Jonathan was granted his ticket of leave, permitting him to reside in the Yass district. The condition was later amended in 1841, allowing him to remain in the Goulburn district instead. In July 1839, Jonathan's daughter Elizabeth, just 15 years old, married 29-year-old William Clark. And shortly after their marriage, the couple moved to northern Victoria, where they established the Ovens Crossing Run, an early pastoral settlement that later developed into the town of Wangaratta. Elizabeth and William played a significant role in founding the Church of England in the region. A portrait of Elizabeth with her son, George, still hangs in the rear of Holy Trinity Cathedral in Wangaratta, so if you're ever in the area, go and check it out. A testament to their legacy. As the portrait is in the public domain, I'm able to share it here on YouTube. And here's Elizabeth and her son, George. In 1840, Jonathan Sr., then 39 years old, received permission to marry for a second time. His bride, Anne Grubb, was just 21. Anne had arrived in Sydney in August 1840 aboard the Lady Clark, listed as a housemaid. She was travelling with her brother Thomas and his new wife Sarah, who had married only 3 weeks before departing England. The Grubbs quickly settled on a farm at Murray's Flats near Goulburn. Remarkably, it was only 2 months after arriving in the colony that Anne married Jonathan. He certainly didn't waste any time. The wedding took place at St. Saviour's Church in Goulburn and was officiated by Reverend William Sowerby, the first resident priest in the Diocese of Goulburn. Following their marriage, Anne and Jonathan settled at Grampian Hills near Maryland, is that how you say that? Apologies, I don't know how to say that, so we'll go with Maryland, where Jonathan was assigned to work for William Shelley. Their first son, William Thomas, was born there in September of 1841, and in October, Jonathan was granted a conditional pardon, freeing him from the constraints of his convict sentence after 16 years. While he was no longer required to report to authorities or serve assigned labour, the pardon came with one key restriction. He was not permitted to leave the colony of New South Wales. Less than a year after receiving his conditional pardon, Jonathan once again found himself in serious legal trouble, and unfortunately had involved his eldest son, John Jr. On the 22nd of August 1842, the pair were committed to stand trial for robbery. A newspaper report from the time described the incident. Yesterday, 4 men were committed to take their trial for robbing one Alfred King, an old man, at Chillick's public house on the Sydney Road, of £47. The prisoners and prosecutor had come down the country from near Goulburn in company. 2 of the prisoners had been sent to Hyde Park Barracks to be identified. The other 2, Jonathan Harris and his son Jonathan, are committed. 6 £1 notes, part of the property, were found concealed in one of the drays. Jonathan and his son were initially held at Darlinghurst Jail. On the 10th of September 1842, both were convicted and sentenced to transportation to Van Diemen's Land. Jonathan Sr. received 15 years and John Jr. 10 years. Jonathan Sr. was first transferred to Cockatoo Island, where he spent a year in confinement before being sent to Van Diemen's Land. While he was on Cockatoo Island, Anne gave birth to their second son, George Robert. Jonathan Sr. arrived in Van Diemen's Land in October on board the Sir John Byng. After Jonathan's conviction in 1842, the family's property was confiscated, leaving Anne in a dire situation. With 5 children to care for, her 2 young sons and 4 stepchildren from Jonathan's first marriage, Sophia, George, Thomas and Harry, Anne petitioned Governor Sir George Gipps for financial assistance. Despite her desperate circumstances and the support of respected settler William Shelley, her request was denied. With the terse response, "I regret that I cannot interfere. in this case. At just 23 years old and left without means, Anne likely returned to her brother Thomas Grubb's property at Murray Flats. Now by 1843, she was living with a man named William Oliver, and together they remained in the Goulburn, Gundaroo and Gunning districts for nearly 2 decades before relocating to Barangong in 1861. When I first saw this building, I actually thought it was a chapel in the Axedale Cemetery. I thought, oh, lovely little chapel. But no, it's a McNamara mausoleum. Wow, it is stunning. Now that speaks to me, gold. Did the McNamara family find gold by any chance? I don't know. If you know, let us know in the comments. What a beautiful mausoleum. Due to Jonathan's ongoing sentence in Van Diemen's Land, Anne was likely unable to legally remarry. However, by 1861, having had no contact with him for almost 20 years, she described herself as a widow of Goulburn. When she married William Oliver, she was 41 years old at the time. Tragically, Anne died just 10 months later on the goldfields near Barangong. Her funeral was conducted by Reverend J.D. Thane, the first clergyman in Young. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the Young Cemetery, one of the earliest burials there. Today her memory is honoured with a memorial plaque recognising her resting place. One of the most remarkable aspects of Anne's later life was the quiet generosity of William Oliver. Not only did he accept and raise Anne's 2 sons from her marriage to Jonathan Harris, but he also took on the care of Jonathan's 4 children from his first marriage, Sophia, George, Thomas and Harry. In a time when blended families were rarely acknowledged and support for women was minimal, William's willingness to embrace all 6 children speaks volumes about his character. We now turn to Jonathan Sr.'s experiences during his years of penal servitude in Van Diemen's Land. At 45 years of age, Jonathan is recorded as a gardener, and upon arrival, he was sent to Port Arthur Penal Settlement. In 1843, Port Arthur was a remote and heavily fortified site, notorious for housing some of the colony's most hardened convicts. Jonathan was placed in second-class probation, a harsh and tightly regulated phase designed to reform prisoners through labour and discipline before they could earn greater freedoms. Convicts at this stage had already undergone initial punishment and were now under close supervision, often working in chain gangs or assigned to physically demanding tasks such as timber cutting, quarrying, or construction. They lived in communal barracks under strict routines, with limited privileges and minimal contact with the outside world. Religious instruction and moral education were part of the daily schedule, but the primary focus remained on obedience and productivity. Port Arthur's isolation and its reputation for severity made second-class probation a grueling experience, intended to break defiance and instill conformity before convicts could progress to more lenient conditions or eventual release. In November 1845, Jonathan was transferred to Bridgewater, a small settlement north of Hobart near the Derwent River, where he served a further 3 months probation. Now at Bridgewater, convict labour was used for infrastructure projects, including the construction of roads and bridges. By June 1848, I believe he was moved to the Glenorchy area, where he was assigned to a Mr. Willett, and during this time he was accused of insolence and sentenced to 2 months of hard labour in chains, a harsh punishment for a man approaching 50. Just 1 month into his sentence, he applied for a ticket of leave, which was refused. Now that doesn't surprise me, it was an odd time to apply. He must have been desperate. Those chains would have been hell. He was told to reapply in 3 months' time and eventually received the ticket of leave 1 year later. In May 1849, Jonathan's application for a conditional pardon was refused, but he eventually was granted one in November 1850. A record in the Colonial Secretary's correspondence also refers to a recommendation from the Solicitor General in Sydney for a reduction in the sentence imposed on Jonathan Harris Sr. Unfortunately, I've been unable to access this record online. However, considering Jonathan left Tasmania before completing his 15-year sentence, it's possible he was shown some leniency. If you have further information about this, please feel free to leave a comment below. I also want to apologise for the rain and thunderstorms you might be able to hear in this recording. Unfortunately, today is the only day I can do this, and it's a very stormy day here. I've tried to have breaks when it gets really loud, but I have to keep going. So if you can hear that in the distance, that's what it is. It's rain, and I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. In May 1853, Jonathan received official approval to marry for a third time. Just over a month later, on the 20th of June, he married convict Mary Ann Squires. At the time, Jonathan was approximately 53 years old, although the marriage record lists his age as 50. Mary Ann was just 25. She had arrived in Tasmania aboard the Anna Maria on the 4th of October 1851, having been transported for stealing a purse containing 9 shillings. Over the next 2 decades, Jonathan and Mary Ann had 8 children together. Wow. The first 2 were born in Tasmania and the remaining 6 in Victoria. Mary Ann was freed by servitude in 1857, which allowed the family to relocate. Based on birth registrations and other sources, it appears they settled in Benalla, in northeastern Victoria, where the last 6 children were born. A newspaper article published at the time of Jonathan's death, in the context of influenza-related fatalities, noted that he had lived in Benalla for 34 years, placing his arrival around 1857. In total, Jonathan fathered at least 16 children across 3 marriages, and here he is. This photo is also on a couple of websites, so I believe I'm okay to publish it here. But I love this photo, and I believe Mary Ann Squires, or who is now Mary Ann Harris, is the lady on the right, and their daughter is on the left, and there's their grandchild sitting on Jonathan's knee. What a beautiful photo. Jonathan and Marianne remained in Benalla for the rest of their lives, and Jonathan passed away in October 1891 at the ripe age of 91, and he is buried at the Axedale Cemetery along with his wife Marianne. Now for young John Harris Jr., the central figure in today's video and the reason we are here at the Axedale Cemetery. Now, as we know, John was sentenced to 10 years transportation for his involvement in the robbery of Alfred King, although his convict record lists the victim as Arthur King. So perhaps it's safest to refer to him simply as Mr. King. At the time, John was just 20 years old, and his convict record describes him as a farm labourer, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall with a rather dark complexion, so likely the result of the Australian sun. A small head, dark brown hair, round face, medium forehead, grey eyes, medium-sized nose and mouth, and a small chin. He also bore a large scar on the left side of his chin and a slight scar near his elbow, and I didn't even bother putting that into ChatGPT because it never listens and does weird scars all over, so I left that part out. Notably, he could read and write. As this was his first offence, John was not sent to Port Arthur like his father. The two were separated almost immediately after sentencing, with John placed aboard the schooner Water Lily, which arrived in Van Diemen's Land sometime before January 1844. Overall, John's convict conduct report is good. He was sent to the Wedge Bay probation station, where he was supposed to serve a period of 2.5 years probation. Initially, John would have experienced a tightly regulated and physically demanding routine. Under the probation system introduced into Van Diemen's Land in 1839, convicts progressed through structured stages. In the first stage, they were placed in labour gangs, often isolated from the general population and subjected to hard physical work. As they advanced through the system, restrictions were gradually eased, with the possibility of earning a ticket of leave or being assigned to public works. At Wedge Bay, convicts were typically engaged in timber cutting, road construction, building infrastructure, and agricultural labour. Those with trades such as blacksmiths or carpenters were often assigned to skilled tasks. The Tasman Peninsula's rich forests made timber a major focus of the station's output, and convicts contributed to the development of roads and tracks connecting to nearby Port Arthur. The daily schedule was rigid. Convicts rose at dawn for muster, followed by long hours of labour, broken only by brief meal breaks. Evenings were reserved for religious instruction, reading, or, I guess if they could read, reading or silence in dormitories. Each station had a schoolmaster and religious instructor, and convicts were expected to attend services and receive basic education or moral instruction. This was part of the system's reformative intent. Though discipline remained strict, infractions could result in solitary confinement, flogging, or a transfer to harsher stations like Port Arthur. John's behaviour must have been impressive, as he was released from the first stage of probation by April 1845. He was then assigned to Albenco for 4 months, followed by a period with an Maran, and finally to an AJ Colette at Ridgeside a private property. He remained there for 12 months, most likely working as a farm labourer. By June 1846, John had been appointed a constable. Convicts who showed good conduct, useful skills, or loyalty to the authorities could be selected for such roles, often while still serving their sentence. These appointments were typically made by local magistrates or district police superintendents, especially in areas where free settlers were reluctant to join the police due to its poor reputation and low pay. In 1847, John was assigned to George Griffith in Avondale for another 12 months. And around this time, his original 10-year transportation sentence was reduced to 7 years, likely in recognition of his continued good behaviour and service. In November, John received his ticket of leave. Now, a ticket of leave would have marked a turning point in John's life, shifting him from assigned labour to a more independent life, though still under certain restrictions. It was often granted as a reward for good behaviour, reliable service, or practical skills, and would have allowed him to live and work within a designated district while reporting regularly to authorities. Although as a constable, I think he'd already proved himself. Continued good conduct could lead to further leniency, and in John's case, he was recommended for a conditional pardon in 1848, and he received it. A clear sign that he had earned the trust of the colonial administration. While a conditional pardon did not permit John to return to Britain, it did grant him the freedom to live and work within the Australian colonies. And, like many other ex-convicts, he took full advantage of the opportunity. According to a letter written by his sons to the Bendigo Advertiser in 1912, John travelled from Tasmania to the Californian goldfields before returning to Victoria after gold was discovered there. In 1852, John married 29-year-old Harriet Pearce, née Hitwell, at St. Peter's Church in Melbourne. I believe she may have been a widow, although their marriage certificate records her as a spinster, a discrepancy that was not uncommon at the time. Many women, particularly those who had immigrated or remarried, were recorded this way, either due to clerical errors, social convention, or a desire to begin a new chapter without the burden of past associations. By 1853, the couple had moved to Bendigo, where John's signature is found on the Bendigo Goldfields petition asking for better treatment for miners, a precursor to the Eureka Stockade. In 1853, tensions on the Victorian goldfields had reached a boiling point, as miners grew increasingly frustrated with the colonial government's harsh licence system. That year, over 5,000 diggers from Bendigo and surrounding goldfields signed what became known as the Bendigo Goldfields Petition. The petition called for a reduction in the monthly licence fee, fairer enforcement, and greater access to land ownership. It was a bold and coordinated act of protest, with signatures collected on long sheets of brown paper and the final document bound in green silk, a nod to the democratic ideals of the Chartist movement. Although the petition was ultimately rejected by the government, it marked a turning point in the political awakening of the goldfields. The grievances it raised, particularly the oppressive licence system and the use of armed troopers, would later fuel the Eureka Rebellion in 1854. For many miners, including former convicts like John, the petition represented a rare opportunity to have their voices heard and to push for a fairer, more inclusive society. "1853 proved to be a very lucrative year for John. It is best to read the letter his sons wrote to the Bendigo Advertiser in November 1912. There must have been some public discussion in the newspaper about Hustler's Reef, one of the richest gold reefs in Bendigo, and speculation about who had first discovered it. At one point, rumours circulated that John Harris, along with a group of black American miners, had been the original discoverers. However, John's sons were quick to put that rumour to rest in a letter to the Bendigo Advertiser. And in doing so, they provide valuable insights into their father's life. Interestingly, and perhaps not surprisingly, they made no mention of his convict past, a detail that remained carefully omitted from the public narrative. I'm going to read the letter to you now, but please note that the language used in the following article reflects the expressions of the earlier 20th century, although I will probably change a couple of the words. So this is it. Of the 15th of November, we spoke of the discoverer, Mr. Jonathan Harris, as one of a numerous party of coloured men. This was not correct. Mr. Harris was born in Sussex, England. His sons, Mr. Harris brothers of Axedale, have furnished us with the following particulars. Jonathan Harris was born in Sussex, England, and came out to Australia when 7 years old. He spent his younger days in Sydney, and from there he went to Tasmania and was a detective in police force. He captured one of the most notorious bushrangers in Tasmania and brought him 100 miles by coach to Hobart. He left that position and went to the California diggings, and was there some time, and came to Bendigo and started digging for alluvial. He and his wife kept a store on the 3rd White Hill. One morning he said to Mrs. Harris, "I think I will take a walk to Eagle Hawk." He took a hammer with him, and on the way he came on a reef, now the old Hustlers, and the first piece he knocked off was covered with coarse gold, and we have the piece now. And I'm not sure if that piece is with the Bendigo Historical Society or still with the family. If you know where that piece of gold is, let us know in the comments. So he worked the reef for some time, and then he got 2 American, we'll say African Americans, to join him, and they worked it with gads and hammers and got a lot of stuff out. There was no machinery to crush at that time, and he sold out to the American or African Americans, and their names being Dunlop and Foster. He then went home to England and took several boxes of fine specimens with him. Some he sold in Melbourne, and what he took home he got crushed in England. In those days it was crushed through rollers instead of stampers, but the machinery being new, he lost a good bit of the gold through it sticking to the rollers. What a shame. He speculated in England in rum, which he purchased from Lemon Heart's big spirit store in London. Returning to Australia, he started business in Melbourne. He was there for some time, but not getting his health, he decided to take up land at Axedale. He died at Axedale on the 20th of July 1881. We have the baton, which he had when he was a detective, also the Colt's revolver, which he had in the mountains of California. In that country he saw stirring times. Besides encounters with grizzly bears and other things, he saw something of lynch law. Once he was in a fight on the diggers' side, the other side being the storekeepers. He got a couple of big bullets in his legs. Dr. Wall, a well-known Bendigonian, was the first man that landed Mr. Harris off the boat when he first came from England. Mrs. Harris died 2 years ago on Christmas Day at Axedale, aged 84 years. Wow, what a life. On the Californian goldfields of the 1850s, lynch law referred to a form of vigilante justice. practiced by miners and settlers in the absence of formal legal systems. With the rapid influx of people during the gold rush and the slow establishment of courts and law enforcement, communities often took justice into their own hands. Judge Lynch became a symbolic figure representing these impromptu trials where accused individuals were judged by their peers without legal representation or due process. Punishments under lynch law range from banishment and whipping to execution, often by hanging. I guess that's where they get the expression lynch mob, right? So while the system was intended to maintain order in chaotic mining camps, it was also prone to bias, racial prejudice, and mob mentality. Foreigners, Indigenous people, and those who were socially marginalised were disproportionately targeted. Apparently, the reef extended for 13 kilometres through the centre of Bendigo, crossing Pall Mall and its intersection with View Street. John and his African-American partners sold their claim to Thomas Hustler, hence the name Hustler's Reef, quite early on. And the reef eventually produced more than 953,000 ounces of gold, an astonishing amount. At today's value, that equates to approximately $6.6 billion, or Australian dollars. Incredible, isn't it? One can't help but wonder, do you think John might have sold a little bit too soon? By March 1856, John and Harriet were back from England and they brought 75 acres of land at Axedale. He also had properties in Collingwood and Fitzroy while developing his Sugarloaf Road farm, including orchard and vineyard, and wine too, judging from these wine labels. Now, if you know anything more about John's wine and farming ventures, please leave a comment, as it would be fascinating to learn more. John and Harriet had 5 children, and he played an active role in local community affairs, and I'm sure Harriet did too. Now, John died in 1881 at the age of 59 from hydatid disease. Hydatid, I hope I'm saying that correctly, a serious parasitic infection caused by a tapeworm. The disease typically affects the liver and lungs, forming slow-growing cysts that can remain asymptomatic for years, so it sounds pretty nasty. And it spreads when humans accidentally ingest tapeworm eggs, often through contact with infected dogs or contaminated food and water. And if left untreated, the cysts can lead to severe complications. So poor John. He was living such a successful and productive life, and to be taken by something so insidious feels especially tragic. Now, here we are. The graves of the Harrises. Now, this one on the right is John's 3 sons. I'm not sure why they're all buried together. So if you know why and you feel like you'd like to share, please do in the comments. Okay, that's, yeah. Now, as you can see to the right, I don't know, hang on, am I going to show you? There is a lot of rabbit holes around this grave. So the rabbits have been having a fantastic time, including covering their names. So we do clean that off in a minute. And I believe John and Harriet's grave is this one here. Look at it. It's so unique. And unfortunately there is no headstone, but I believe that is where John Harris, and probably Harriet too, are buried. And I wonder what it looked like when it was first built. If you would like to see more of the Harris family treasures, the Bendigo Historical Society has catalogued them on the Victorian Collections website, and I will leave a link below in the description. John Harris Jr. lived a life that spanned continents, convict stations, goldfields and community halls. From the trauma of his youth and the hardship of transportation, he rose to become a respected figure in Tasmania, Bendigo and Axedale. He was a constable, a miner, a storekeeper, a landowner and a family man. His journey through the Californian goldfields, encounters with lynch law and brushes with danger speak to a life lived boldly, while his later years reflect stability, contribution and quiet success. Though his death from disease was tragic, his legacy endures in the land he cultivated, the family he raised and the stories preserved by his descendants. Today, as we stand at his grave in Axedale Cemetery, we remember not just a man, but a life that encapsulates the resilience at the heart of our extraordinary convict history.